Hey, this is Madalyn Sklar.
And Suze Cooper, and you're listening to All Things Audio. Well, it's just you and me at the start of this then.
I know. I tell you, Suze, I have seen a very big change in Spaces. I don't know what's going on. I wonder if they changed the algorithm to not be favoring it as much, which would make no sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say to you, just the fact that there's only you and I in here right now from the start does seem to be what's happening recently.
Yeah, when did that happen last? It's very strange.
I literally cannot remember the last time. You know, we've got 9 people who have responded to say that they've set a reminder. And usually I would say at least half of those people turn up. And I'd say that probably we know who those people are. You know, we're always talking about the regular community and people being around. So it's very, very different to just be the two of us that are here right at the very beginning. Hi there, Stephanie. We were just talking about how we're finding fewer and fewer people in Spaces at the start of Spaces right now. And this being a case in point. So we're very pleased to have you here.
I've noticed for several months now, especially in the past few weeks, because I'm doing so many other Spaces, and they're all like this now. We're just not getting as many live people and not as many replay like we used to.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's across the board. It's not just like, oh, this one kind of space, so maybe it's the content. No, I'm seeing it across the board. Right now, I am hosting or co-hosting 5 different Spaces every week right now. And they're all different from each other. So I'm just noticing it everywhere.
Yeah, and in fact, that was why we sort of put out a bit of a call out that today is going to be a little bit different in that we're quite up for having a bit of an open mic and a discussion around that, right, Madalyn? Because that is what's happening in social audio right now. And that's generally what we cover here on All Things Audio. You know, even as you're saying yourself, you're doing 5 different Spaces. It's not like you have a small number of followers either, is it? I mean, for me, I sort of look at it, I think, oh, perhaps people aren't seeing my tweets. I'm kind of teetering around the 3,000 followers. It goes up, it comes down, goes, you know, a couple here, a couple there. But Madalyn, you've got a substantial amount of people following you. So there is kind of no reason as to why your numbers would have dropped, right?
Right. So I just really have been wondering what is going on. Is it something with the algorithm that we don't know about? We know that social media platforms favor whatever's the new shiny thing. And I don't know what they're considering new and shiny now. You know, when the long tweets came out for blue subscribers here on Twitter, it was favoring that. The algorithm liked that. And it's like Spaces these past few years. It seems like a lot of Spaces do very well. So I don't know. Is it because our titles are not good? I've actually been using ChatGPT to help give me title ideas just to make sure I'm doing it in the mindset of a copywriter. And I'm still not seeing much of a change.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's a great use, right? Even if it's just to get ideas and sort of brainstorm in a way that you might not have thought of putting a title.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, there's a really cool tool I've been using called Magi. It's taking the word magic and AI together. My friend Destin Stout developed this tool, and it basically works on top of ChatGPT, but it allows you to be a bit more organized than just using ChatGPT direct. And so I tried the free trial with this, fell in love. Now I'm a paid subscriber. I'm paying like $9 a month. It's very reasonable for the plan I'm on. And very much like how with Spaces, we can have folders for our bookmarks. Same with this. I can have folders and organize all my different ChatGPT prompts and things because I'm doing so many different things. I want to keep it organized. And if I'm just in ChatGPT direct, it's one big mess. I have so many different things in there and I can't find something that I did maybe a month or 2 ago. So, but I do experiment with this for copywriting just to get ideas. And it works really well for that, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and you know, using it for titles is a great idea. I mean, this is we've switched really to quite a generic title. I've used the same title quite a few times now, this social audio news, views and ways to use. It wasn't meant to rhyme, but it does. Partly because we used to tag each other in the title, didn't we? But then we sort of thought, well, that's kind of real estate that we don't need. And then we wanted regular listeners to know that this was still All Things Audio, so we still have the hashtag. But in fact, this week, I wanted to change that title because I knew that we wanted to have this conversation around kind of the state of social audio generally and kind of what's going on, a bit of a landscape check-in. And I tried to change the title and it just would not let me save the new title at all. I had to either cancel the space and start again or stick with what I had. I could type it in, but I just couldn't it just didn't light up the save button. So again, it's glitchy. It's still not a smooth sailing. Little tiny things like that creeping in on spaces, which we totally expected to see without the kind of amount of maintenance that was there a year ago. But yeah, kind of irritating because then I can't tell people that that's actually what we're doing and what we're going to talk about. So yeah.
Something's going on at Twitter. We'd like to know what it is.
Let's dive in with this very first tweet that we've come across, Madalyn. I mean, maybe this is one of the reasons for the change in spaces. This tweet from Dilly is around bots joining spaces and how that's kind of inflating numbers for some spaces. What do you think of this? I mean, could this be in the back end that Twitter are trying to quash this a little bit? Do you think they're working on the idea of these bots being in spaces and that might be impacting the spaces that we're seeing and therefore not as many people actually joining? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder. I mean, we've been hearing reports of bots taking over in spaces and numbers are being inflated and people buying listeners, which I think is crazy. We reported on that pretty recently here. It makes you wonder if something's going on internally with Twitter to fix all of this, and that's why we're not seeing spaces perform at the level we normally see with the live listeners, the replay listeners, and all of that. So it could be something that's just under wraps that they're working on behind the scenes because there's not a large staff at Twitter anymore. We just don't hear things through the grapevine like we used to.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just not getting that kind of backroom chat, I suppose, in terms of what might be happening. So, I mean, what we are seeing is, I'm seeing fewer spaces on my spaces bar, on the space bar where the fleets used to be. And I'm not really being recommended any spaces from anywhere outside of those people that I would normally see and spaces that I would normally join. Now, if that's happening to me, I realise that's a sample of one, but I'm guessing that's kind of happening to other people as well, which as a spaces host obviously makes it very difficult to build up the live listeners and build up that community that we've so enjoyed doing here. Madalyn, you've recently started a couple of new spaces, haven't you? Regular ones. And are you seeing that in those spaces, that it's difficult to kind of draw new people in and let them know what's happening?
It's definitely challenging. The newer ones I'm doing right now are a bit different from my regular spaces I've been doing for the past couple of years. One of them is just bringing people together for a little book club after George Silverman's recent passing. He had written a book about word-of-mouth marketing, and I had never gotten around to reading it. And so upon his passing, I'm like, I'm going to get his book. I'm going to get the audiobook version, and maybe other people in my circle want to do this with me, and why don't we come on Spaces once a week? Because you know me, I love the power of audio. I love using Spaces. So it's not something I'm really promoting and making a big deal about, but it is public because it is a public space. I just like that platform for us to come together. We're reading the book or listening to the audiobook on our own time and coming together once a week to discuss it and learn from each other, get other insights. But it's 8 chapters of the audiobook, so we're just coming together once a week. I'm just advising everybody, tune in, to the audiobook, and then we'll just do this until we get to the end. And we're already more than halfway through. This week will be week 6. So I'm only doing this for a few more weeks. It wasn't even an experiment. I just thought it was an interesting way to bring people together instead of doing a Zoom call, which I think prior to Clubhouse and Spaces, that's probably what I would have done, right? That's how we kind of think of bringing people together to have a discussion that could be public, but it doesn't have to be. It's not really necessarily this big public thing or something I'm promoting. It's just, hey, let's get together and talk about this book that we're all interested in. And then the other one that I recently started is a separate Twitter account. It has nothing to do with my business life. It's more of a passion project. I'm actually right now putting together a podcast for it, but because it's been taking me a while and I'm a little bit stuck with the part of the podcast I'm working on, getting it launched, I thought, why don't I just be hosting a space each week in the meantime? I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? Like a live podcast versus this recorded podcast. So I recently started doing that, but it's a much smaller Twitter account. And it's been mostly word of mouth, and that's helped. But I think it just must be the whole discoverability thing, Suze, that's lacking right now. We thought it had improved because look at the web. We now have discoverability for spaces on the web. Whenever you're on desktop, on the right side, you see 3 live spaces that are happening right now. I'm not sure what's going on.
And we were kind of hoping that was sort of the launch pad to, we were talking about it last week, spaces being available to speak into via desktop and building out that kind of accessibility in order to use the desktop to do the broadcast. But I think if you're having difficulty getting people actually in the space, then whether it's on the phone or on the desktop is sort of beside the point, isn't it? And certainly if you're fighting against bots, which it seems like lots of people appear to be, then that isn't giving you a true picture of spaces. It's like buying followers. That it's one of those things that if people aren't actually engaged in the content that you're creating, it's pointless. It's just numbers. And that kind of spoils it for everybody else as well, which isn't great. This tweet by Dilly basically goes through the fact of all the numbers that they've seen in their spaces, looking at the fact that there are more phone listeners than other listeners, which I think we would expect anyway, right, Madalyn? And those other listeners are generally thought to be people that are listening on the web via desktop. And you can't see who those people necessarily are. But the numbers given here are things like, they're seeing those other listeners growing in huge spurts of 50 plus at a time and adding up to like thousands by the time their space is underway. I mean, how do you even go about starting to try and tackle that, Madalyn? It's crazy.
It is crazy. So I hope something's being done about trying to adjust this so that it is back to easier discoverability. People, I mean, remember it used to be very easy to set the reminder for a space and then get the reminder. But that doesn't really work well anymore. I rarely see that in my notifications now, because that was always a way for me to not have to overthink and worry about it. I see one that I'm interested, I hit set reminder, and then it pops up in my notification when it's time.
Yeah, and it's, that's a great mechanic, isn't it? That's what you sort of expect. You've set a reminder, you're going to get a notification, and it will just take you straight into the space at the time when it starts, and there you go. I mean, as we've said, like we span the space up at top of the hour like we usually do, and usually we would see probably 7, maybe 8 people all join at once, a few that we recognise, a few that we don't, a real mixture. But it's very, very rare to open the door and be the only one in here, and then to just be the two of us for a good few minutes. Then Stephanie joined us. Thanks, Stephanie, for a little bit. But it was 9 minutes past before we had a nice core of people in here that we would normally see the minute the space starts. So I don't know. In the early days of Spaces, when it was like a beta product, there was sort of this unwritten thing going around that, you had to kind of keep going for about 15 minutes before you could build up a core of listeners. That was sort of the point at which, whether or not it was algorithmically being pushed out in that time, or there seemed to be a peak that you could see if you carried on going for 15 minutes or more. But over time, that's kind of been difficult to sort of prove that that's really a thing. And generally, as I say, we come in and we've got a core of people that are here. We're very lucky in that, we've built the community around this, doing it very consistently every Wednesday. People know that we're here. And it's kind of sad if that's not happening for some reason. And as you say, I don't know that we're going to get to the bottom of it. I think there are strings being pulled in the back at Twitter somewhere. I'm just hoping that they get pulled and then perhaps pushed back so that it becomes a little more easier and a bit more stable to know that people are going to know, A, that you're doing the space, B, that you're live, and C, that they can jump in and listen really easily. I mean, replays as well, Madalyn. We've seen that number go down, and that has always consistently been quite high. So it's...
Yeah, I've seen that lower too across the board with all the different spaces and other people's spaces. Andrew from Spaces Dashboard did put a tweet into the chat. I just stuck it into the nest, and hopefully he could talk about this when we take the mic request. He says Twitter's been testing this week and using bots. And if you click on this link he has here over to Spaces Dashboard, is you can look in the graphs, and he says it'll kind of give you a sense of how they use bots while testing. I definitely would love to hear more about that when we're ready for those mic requests.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such everybody on social media, you're always trying to, if you want to get attention with your content, you're trying to kind of play the algorithm game. You're trying to work out, at the core of it, if you put out good, consistent content, right, that resonates with your audience, you should therefore appear in their feed algorithmically, be recommended to people, and get those people interested in what it is that you're doing. But it just feels like the whole bot thing is something that you just can't even create against, if you see what I mean. Like, can you ever create the content that would tip the balance? I mean, numbers like that. And then if you had numbers like that, you couldn't be sure of them, right? You couldn't trust them. So it's just a crazy, crazy world out there in social audio right now.
It really is. And speaking of crazy, what's going on with Stitcher? I was shocked to hear that the Stitcher app's going away. What's happening?
Yeah, that's right. It's a really popular one as well, I think. Quite a few people I know actually use the Stitcher app, and the release was put out yesterday. And I had a couple of WhatsApp messages from people saying Stitcher's going and they're going to move the show pages to Pandora, which is great, except we don't have Pandora over here in the UK. So what am I going to do? Basically, Stitcher, which is owned by SiriusXM, is being discontinued from the end of August this year. And they put out some information yesterday. If you use Stitcher to listen to your podcasts and you've got your show lists on there, you can export them so that you don't miss anything. But equally, like, it's going. It's not going to be a standalone platform for SiriusXM anymore. They've said they're still going to create their premium content. So Stitcher Studios and Earwolf Comedy Network are the ones that create content for Stitcher, and they're still going to apparently continue making podcasts dependent on the hosts and the creators that they get to work with, which is a bit of an odd line, really. Not too sure what to read into that. But yeah, I mean, it's known for really great discoverability, so it's a real kick in the teeth for podcasting, really, because it is the one that does give nice recommendations. You've got a great kind of library over there that spans a whole load of genres, and it's really user-friendly, which is why people use it. But yeah, SiriusXM have said that they're going to basically incorporate podcasts into the flagship subscription business and not have Stitcher as a standalone entity anymore. There's no job cuts, so it's not like Spotify where they've got rid of kind of a whole load of podcasting employees. It doesn't seem like anyone's losing their job at the moment in podcasting over there. It is apparently all just being consolidated and just brought further into the SiriusXM business. But yeah, it's frustrating, disappointing, sad for people that are used to using Stitcher. And there's more information on their website if you're a Stitcher user as to what you should do next.
I'm just sad because as a longtime podcast listener, podcast host, Stitcher was like one of the early ones. I don't use it that often, but there are times where I'm on some website and maybe it's the show notes page and they have the Stitcher app in there, and that's how I'm going to listen. It just seems strange that it's no more. It's going to be no more. So I don't know. I just found it odd. And we got one more piece of news that you uncovered, and then we'll be ready to take mic requests.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't like doing this when it's on the information and it's behind a paywall, because I'd far rather share a link that everyone can read the story of. But I did think this was quite interesting. So I'm afraid I have been sucked in by the clickbaity title and then read the information that is on there, which is only really about 2 paragraphs of the full story. But this is about Bloomberg publishing more audio over on YouTube. So I found this interesting just from an audio landscape point of view. As we've been saying, we've not been seeing as many spaces over here, and I've certainly not been seeing as many spaces from established news providers and publishers. And so it's interesting to think about where people have gone, like where are these businesses going? Where are they putting their broadcast time? And yeah, it looks like Bloomberg are going to be increasing their live video streams of the radio and podcasts that they create, and they're going to do that over on YouTube. Now, of course, we've had it's got to be a good year's worth of podcasting coming to YouTube, and, what's that going to be like? And it has been such a slow process, certainly over here in the UK. It all happened over in the US first, where you could put your podcast up as a podcast playlist. It doesn't kind of automatically take it from your RSS feed. So it is a separate thing if you're a podcaster that you have to put up in another place. So you'll be hosting your podcast somewhere else and distributing it out. But for YouTube, if you want it up there as a podcast playlist, you need to do that separately. It then, sparked off lots of conversations about whether podcasts were going to have to all have video, because YouTube is such a huge platform and obviously very video first. I think a lot of that has kind of died away, and I think I'm hearing more conversations from audio sort of stronghold that, audio is audio and we can keep going with this, and that the static image with an audio on YouTube is kind of working okay. But it has just been such a slow process. So, interesting to think that Bloomberg they're obviously talking about putting video streams of the audio content up there. So they're very much playing to the strengths of YouTube in that way. They're going to be using video on there. For those of us that might be putting audio content like we do over on the All Things Audio YouTube channel, the podcast goes up every week with a static image created by Headliner. It's an audiogram that goes up there, and it is automated. It pushes it through from Spreaker, which is our podcast host. So I've been kind of doing that to keep an eye on what YouTube are doing. So it's in one of these podcast playlists. The idea was that eventually that would give you more discoverability on YouTube because you were categorized as a podcast. So if someone was looking specifically for a podcast on your topic or in your genre, it would then be recommended to them as some content that might be useful to them. But we're hearing things like the whole RSS feed thing. That's not something that we're waiting on happening. It's not like they're thinking of ingesting the whole RSS feed thing. It feels like it is always going to be a standalone thing. And they're also saying that YouTube doesn't want to take any podcast feeds that are containing ads. So if you at the moment create a podcast that you're putting up on your RSS feed that has got any kind of sponsorship or advertising in it, you would then need to not only upload it separately over to YouTube, but you would also need to remove those ads out of it. Otherwise, they're going to flag it and it won't be pushed out. So that's an awful lot of work to ask podcasters to do when really, the reason we all use podcast hosts is to distribute that one episode into lots of places at the click of a button. Really, YouTube is asking an awful lot of creators at the moment, I think. But that's a bit of an update on the YouTube audio landscape and bringing in this idea that Bloomberg are obviously looking to be over there as well, which I think is just super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing more of these podcasts gravitating over to YouTube, especially with that announcement not that long ago that they have like a whole podcast section now. I find it so odd because you can take one of your videos and just have it be tagged as a podcast, even if it's not.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, thinking about the mechanic of how it works at the moment. You are literally, you upload it as a video and then you select it to put into their podcast playlist. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've created that as what would be considered a traditional podcast. So you're right. I mean, any content could go in there, which then negates that whole discoverability because you're a podcast idea. So I think there's still a lot to be figured out. I've mentioned it before. Last year's podcast show, YouTube were absolutely everywhere. This year's podcast show, they were nowhere to be seen. And it really feels like even YouTube have kind of either taken a step back or a pause, or just really uncertain about what the next direction is for audio and podcasting for them.
But I think bottom line, podcasting is not going anywhere. You don't have to incorporate video into your podcast, but we are seeing a lot of these big podcasts adding video and making sure they're over on YouTube with it. So, and then of course, more recently, we've reported on how some of these live streams that are like a live podcast are getting set up to be exclusively on Twitter now. So lots of interesting changes going on for sure. And while we're waiting for those mic requests, I just put in the nest your latest newsletter, which is one of my favorite newsletters. You have such a good one that relates to all things audio. You want to real quickly talk about that? Because, it's great and everybody should be subscribing to it. We should make it a sponsor of this. I mean...
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so last week's Stop, Rewind, Play, which is the name of my Substack newsletter, which I'm desperately trying to promote here on Twitter, but I'm rallying against the Twitter gods that hate Substack. So it's really hard because about 4 people see my tweet whenever I mention Substack or use the link. But yes, last week was totally inspired by the conversation that we were having with Youssef from Blast Radio. He said some really interesting stuff and put it in a really clear way around why social audio can sound so bad. And around the fact that it's not always, it's not really the creator's fault. It's around the way that the audio is encoded and the way that it has to be such a small file so that it's speedy, so we can hear this real-time conversation. And it's very similar to the audio from a Zoom call, the voice over internet protocol, which is what it's called. He was talking about VoIP. And I just thought, he put it so succinctly that I thought, yeah, let's run with that and write something about it. So it's actually sparked quite a few conversations. I had a few emails around what was said in there. I've quoted what Youssef said as well, and referred to last week's show. So if anyone wants to know about sample rates, which is what it's all about, but kind of demystified, and why buying, top-notch audio equipment, while that's really fun and I love doing it, it will only take you so far in terms of improving your quality, because in the end, you're at the mercy of the platform and the data exchange that it needs to use in order to get this audio live. So it kind of dives into that a little bit. I've been blown away, actually, by the number of people that have read this week's Substack. It's been by far the most read one so far, and also, as I say, sparked the most conversations. So do go along and have a look, have a read, send me your thoughts. I love hearing from you, and subscribe, obviously. So yeah, that would be great.
And we got Mimi here with us. Hi, Mimi. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
A long while. But yeah, I just wanted to, what I found the most interesting, I guess 2 things now that I think about it. The most interesting is YouTube turning into podcasts. Well, I guess adding like the podcast feature. It makes a lot of sense just because people put video of like podcast interviews, and then sometimes like they'll even just like won't watch the video, but they'll just have it on in the background. So that, it does make sense to pivot towards that. And I've also, of course, we all know that YouTube is a really good platform to basically kind of like carve out your own like internet real estate, so to speak, as I've heard people say before, because it is a search engine within itself. And, also to the Google results, the Google search results are always come up like video, like usually up top, like YouTube. So it's really cool to see that. And to hear about that. And then also the other thing too, I found quite interesting was, Twitter using like bots to kind of test this week. I'm curious to know like kind of like what that's about and what that will lead to eventually. Like kind of like what the point of that is.
I think are they not just testing it for stability in terms of how, like, is it just how many people can we get in a space before it breaks? Maybe. I don't know.
Right. Because of all the political stuff they've been doing lately.
The political stuff really attracted a lot of people, and the spaces died on them. Like it did pull the rug from under them, and they did have to restart. And that's humiliating and embarrassing, to be quite honest. You know, maybe they're just thinking there's going to be more of those massive spaces, and so they're literally stress testing it.
Well, I put the link back in the nest that Andrew had shared earlier. I wish we could hear from him exactly what's going on. It sounds like he's got the scoop. But when you click on the link that takes you over to Space's dashboard to see these tests, I mean, they were testing it with over 1 million live listeners. A lot of these. I mean, I see 1.7, 1.2, 1.2. So, I mean, is this a stress test? What exactly are they doing? And is that why we're having some issues with Twitter? I do remember seeing a tweet several days back, I think it was, saying that they were doing some tests and that, we could see some issues. And I've seen some issues with Spaces recently where speakers were having a hard time getting the mic. There's some spaces I've been in where the host will stop hearing the speakers and the speaker has to leave and come back, go out and come back in. Like really weird, bizarre stuff.
And stuff that we also thought we were over. Like we've been there before, right?
Right. Twitter's not a startup, it's being treated like one.
Yeah. And I guess we always expected that there would be tech faults and issues once there's not an active, focused team in the back end working on it day in, day out. But they still have to make sure that it, if they're going to run it as a feature, they need to make sure that it's stable enough to be used. I don't know. There must be a correlation between whatever these tests are and these spaces that are flooded with all these bots, and the fact that those of us that have been doing this, for 2 years and nearly 100 shows, are suddenly seeing fewer people in the space live and those fewer replays as well. I mean, it's certainly in terms of ever since they've put that ridiculous reach number on every single tweet, which drives me up the wall. Like, I'm not sure I need to know that, but it has really been quite demoralising. Some of my tweets are just being seen by absolutely no one. And some of those are me trying to promote this social audio space. I'm trying to use their feature on their platform, and it's still not being pushed out to more than a handful of people. It's really hard.
I've been seeing that as well with my Twitter accounts. And being a Twitter Blue subscriber, we're supposed to have a further reach. And I did see that for quite a while, and it seems like it's changed. So does that have something to do with all these tests they're doing? Is it because we kept hearing that Elon wasn't paying some of these bills? It's like, how is Twitter running when he's not paying the bills? It makes you kind of wonder what's going on over there.
And also, it's one thing for you and I to be saying this about, a small group of people that we enjoy doing this to every single week. But it's absolutely no wonder why those more established, bigger firms and companies suddenly aren't there doing it. If we can't get people in, then they're not. Why would they spend the time and pay their employees to, spin up a space and create a social audio environment when no one's going to see it and no one's going to join? So I don't know. I mean, is this the beginning of him running it into the ground so that he can just say, oh, look, it hit the wall and that was it. Nobody joined it. Nobody whatever. And we've also got Clubhouse that have gone dark at the moment completely as well. And they've said we're coming up with this whole new way of doing Clubhouse. We're going to be reshuffling it, reorganizing it, and doing different things. And we're not going to be talking to the community while we're doing that, which is fair enough. But that leaves generally, we've really only got Spaces in Clubhouse on the major platforms now in social audio. So that leaves you with a real kind of vague idea of what's happening with this thing anymore.
Yeah, it's really, it sounds like a lot of like social audio apps and things are undergoing a lot of maintenance, which could then lead people to going elsewhere. looking at other apps, trying to integrate other apps and, uh, testing those out instead. And then also speaking to like the Twitter Blue subscription, I myself, and usually, I mean, right now I don't have my check, so I'm not using Twitter Blue at the moment, just because speaking to the same point, like you were supposed to have like, more reach and things of that nature. And it's not really happening now. I don't know if it's because of the bots and the testing going on, but I had Twitter Blue for a while just because I was using it way back before it was called a thing. It was just when they were kind of testing it, and it was like what, $2.99, $3.99, or whatever it was. And I did like the features that came with it, and still do enjoy like some of the features, however, but now it's kind of like, well, I'm kind of learning to like live without those features and not have the subscription, because it's still, I mean, you still get like all these, bots, and whatnot. And I'm having to like, especially with me, I'm in the Web3 crypto NFT space. So I don't know how many bots I block per day, honestly, because like whenever I post something, I get like an immediate comment with something like a bot, like putting something, and I, block it, also because I'm trying to make sure that the quality of my followers, satisfies the algorithm so that my stuff is seen. What's been helping me, honestly, the last few days, is just hopping in spaces. That's the only way that I've been, able to kind of feel like I have a little bit of reach. Like I'll get, more followers, and, my comments and everything in the back, I guess, in the side chat in the comment section will be seen, so that's the only way, that, I've kind of been feeling like, okay, I'm kind of making some progress with growing my audience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing your insights on this. And interesting, like just being more active in spaces. That makes perfect sense to me.
Ray, I see your hand. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Ray.
Hey, hi everybody. Happy Women Wednesday, Suze and Madalyn. Thank you for listening to me. You guys are awesome. Okay,
You're awesome
my
too.
question is, let me see. I have so many, but I'll start slow. I didn't start my podcast yet. I'm not sure if I should start on YouTube, since it's going to be new and hot. But you always got to figure out the logistics with everything. And I was thinking on Twitter, I think that Elon is always going to be a game player. I think he's always going to be playing tennis. That's just how I feel. Because I just think certain business people are like that. He likes the game of testing, and I think he will go to 1,000 if he could. So I don't think you will ever be able to pin it down. That's my observation of it, but it could be wrong. If you're trying to figure it out, I doubt it. That's his personality. I mean, just that's how some men, corporate men are. They like to test. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And then I was thinking that maybe the reason why Twitter is going through all of this is not only the algorithm, I think it's the AI. And I think between the algorithm and the AI and the bots, that is the whole conglomerate of what is going on. That's what I think. I'm not sure. I'm not an engineer, but that's what I think from all that I've seen. I think it's going through a turmoil. It's like, when you go swimming, and if you go too far under, the current could take you. So I think that's where it's at in a way. I hope that was understandable. And yeah. I'm Ray in the hot pink Ferrari. And guess what? I'm parking. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. I agree with everything you're saying. So you're spot on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, there's a whole load of interest. The next big thing, we've been through social audio during the pandemic really fitted what people needed and wanted. Then we had the whole NFT explosion, and that was all going to be, the next big thing. And now it's all ChatGPT and AI, and how can we automate stuff, and how can we let we want the bots to recommend stuff to us in some respect, but then in the other respect, we don't want them to come and flood all our spaces and stuff. So, trying to get a relationship with these AI bot things, all of that new stuff, trying to work out where it is actually useful and where it's not causing more issues than it's solving in a way, I think is just being figured out. And you're right, Elon's one of those people who is going to take the risk, going to try out a whole load of things, and is never going to uncover the whys and wherefores. So, yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people who will sit here and scratching my head, trying to figure stuff out. And, how can I cheat this algorithm or beat this here or do a bit more over there? I know I'm never going to get to the bottom of it, really.
And Andrew's coming up, so we can finally get some scoop from him. There you are. You made it.
Tell us about the bots. What's all this testing? What are they doing?
And why?
Well, I think what it shows is, like everything in life, there's good and bad things. So I think the Twitter bots, you could probably categorize them as the good bots. I think you hit the nail on the head, Suze. They're probably load testing and pushing out and stress testing features. I did hear on one of the tests, they were talking about Android development. Obviously, they keep very quiet in there. And there's so many of the spaces. I don't know if you saw on the dashboard, there was like 6 or 7 on the 27th that were going on, all with over 1 million followers. But when you look at the graphs, what's interesting is you can see that very quickly how they can go from essentially 4,000 followers or 48,000 followers to, in the space of 5-10 minutes, up to 1.2 million. So it's basically highlighting that you can, if you so wanted to, manipulate the data within your space. Now, let's hope, or actually, I think we can pretty much assume that Twitter knows that this can be done, because obviously they're doing it themselves, but they're doing it from the good side, purely for the testing. And I'm sure they're spotting if there are any rogue actors actually out there in the wild doing this as well, that at some point they can retrospectively go back and penalize those spaces, or at least highlight them and showcase that they have been botted, as it were. Now, of course, that only really matters if you've got a relationship with those people running the spaces and how they're using the data to either manipulate advertisers or make themselves look bigger than they are. Who knows what their motives can be, but there are good, like anything, there are good and bad bots.
So we reckon that there could be like bad actors basically trying to inflate their own spaces for their own ends. But in terms of these Twitter ones, we think perhaps they are just trying to test out the feature and see how far they can take it.
Yeah, definitely on Twitter side, there's no motive for them to try and inflate their numbers, because they're just keeping it quiet. They're only doing it themselves. They don't advertise. It's only because of the dashboard I'm able to pick up these scenarios. And of course, once I spot that somebody is potentially part of Twitter, the interesting thing is we've got something coming out which we've showcased a few examples of, which are called our collections. And we think that's going to be quite an interesting experiment or breakthrough, because imagine if you didn't have to rely on the Spaces dashboard leaderboard, for example, because it's based on who has the most listeners. What about if you could create your own collection and it was made of the top prompt engineers in OpenAI, who don't really have a huge following at the moment, but there's 10 of them who are absolutely brilliant. And you could take that list and that could grow, and you could maybe get that up to 50, 100, whatever it might be, and you transform your lists, either existing or new lists, and it creates a Spaces leaderboard for you. So it only shows you when those people are actually coming into Spaces, when they're talking, if they're talking in anyone else's. It also allows you to see if anybody else is mentioning their tweets inside another space. And essentially what it means is you could then share that with either the whole world or you could keep it private. And suddenly we're going to have this whole influx of new followers and new experts and new categories and new people that us as regular hosts have unleashed onto the world to let everybody see.
It's an amazing way of categorizing spaces together. And, you know, I love Twitter lists and I feel like this is its sister. Social audio sister.
Absolutely. I mean, that example I posted into the chat is the Bloomberg one. And what that does is it essentially looks at all of their properties, all of their journalists, all of their staff. And you can see whenever, any point, any one of those people are talking into a space. It only does spaces.
And you're right in that, you know, although I've said, you know, I'm not seeing Bloomberg on here anymore. Perhaps they're putting all their eggs into the YouTube basket because we found this article that says that they're going to be doing more over on YouTube. In fact, Spaces dashboard shows us that they are spinning up Spaces, you know, every other day pretty much, and still doing Bloomberg politics and still doing the different, you know, different areas of the business, as it were, for conversation live here on Twitter. And I guess what that tells me is that for some reason I'm now not seeing them, because I used to see them all the time, but they're not popping up in my Spaces bar automatically, and they're not on the tab particularly for me. I'm obviously going to have to go searching for those spaces. I think I'm going to do a little bit of research around people who I haven't seen around recently, who I've kind of assumed just aren't in spaces at the moment or not doing them, and see if that's really the truth. So yeah, I've got a bit of Spaces dashboard research to carry out this week, I think.
Yeah, and what you'll also find is that, again, probably in the next week or 2 weeks, this will be pushed out so that everybody can come in and actually start building their own collections. And what it will mean is there will be almost thousands of new doorways and new categories and areas of expertise that we can now all dive into. And we're hopefully going to find some amazing conversations we just didn't know were happening. And once we get to that point, the next piece of the puzzle, which Madalyn alluded to earlier, the biggest pain point in the world is when you see something you like and you set a reminder and you don't get it. It's the most frustrating thing in the world, especially to do with spaces. Now, we've also fixed that issue. So you will also be able to get alerts for the collections and the spaces that you set up. So you'll be able to go in. Now, why it's important is traditionally when you set up an alert on Twitter, you have to be following that person. Now, I don't want to follow the person, and I don't want to have to rely on the categories that have come down from the drop down on Twitter, which changes all the time. Is it just for their retweets or the alerts or the spaces? In the dashboard, you're going to be able to go around, and anybody you see on the dashboard, you can click a button to say, okay, set up an alert for that user. And then if they ever schedule, if they ever speak in a space or they ever co-host in a space, you'll get an alert. And I can tell you, having used it for over 3 months, it's a game changer. It absolutely changes the way, because you don't even have to be on Twitter anymore. You suddenly get an email notification. You're like, oh, Christ, I forgot about that. Click, and then I'm back into Twitter. It's the magnet that Twitter didn't realise it needed.
Amazing. Thank you for explaining all that, Andrew. It's brilliant. Thanks. Ray, I can see your hand. Have you got something to say related to what Andrew's just said? And then I want to hear from Morgan as well before we close out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe I was thinking kind of like maybe they're promoting to other people besides with the blue spot. Maybe they're promoting to people that are going to invest more. And that's why we don't hear from them. That's what I was kind of thinking. It could be, and it might not be. I just felt that's what it, after I heard what Andrew said, maybe they are doing their, they did their, SEO and targeting towards a certain market. And the people that are in the market, it's a special market that you will get the notifications, maybe. Just my observation. I don't know.
Yeah, great thought. Maybe.
Although you do expect that if you do say, I want to be alerted because I want to see when this user has a space, you just expect that to be, table stakes. That's got to happen. That's got to work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad now as the host that I do now get the notification reminding me to actually start the space, because for a while that didn't happen, and I actually had to go hunting for the card for my own space in order to even start it, which just was so frustrating, because, you know, when it hits the moment when you've said your space is going to start, the last thing you want to then be doing is clicking 400 times in the app to find it. It should automatically be there for me to just press it with one click and start on time. And it's a really frustrating thing that card just stopped one day, and then in exactly the same way it just came back. Like today I've managed to start it again from the card in my notifications, but for a good few months it wasn't there, and it was really annoying. It's such a simple thing. Morgan, hello, welcome to All Things Audio this week. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Slightly sore throat if I sound a little different today, but it is me.
We've got Husky Morgan this week.
Husky Morgan.
Tell us about bots. What are your thoughts on what's going on and where this might lead us?
Oh, right. Well, it's more like an eyebrow raised. I imagine this isn't like a huge platform-wide problem, but you know, if you have an incentive to do it and you're trying to boost your numbers, and maybe you have a little team and maybe there's some money involved, then, you know, it's a temptation for some people. I think there's one of my eyebrows raised, without mentioning names, is I think there's a very prominent Spaces host who's often quite high up the leaderboards, who I think has consistently large turnout for every single space, which, you know, amazing to see. I would say almost no other host other than Elon himself is able to achieve such consistency. So that might raise an eyebrow. There is a kind of question with people like that do raise suspicions. We've also seen such hosts and spaces, I think, being endorsed by the platform itself. So let's say Elon or David Sachs might mention these people or retweet them. So, you know, if those suspicions are, if there's anything to them, it would be nice to have that kind of cut off. And, you know, Andrew, if you suggest if at some point these things are corrected for, then maybe that would be accounted for too. But I don't think it's a widespread problem. I mean, it's a general thing on the internet that if you can create accounts and get the right tokens or access keys and things, you can do this if you want. It's pretty hard to stop it. So there's that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day who was looking at the different platforms and assessing the state of social audio, you know, a thing we do now and again. And he was like, "Oh, well, there's this one bright spot. There's this host on Spaces that had this many people the other day and seems to keep doing it." And I wanted to sort of, you know, gently let them down and say, "Oh, well, this might not be the bright spot that we want. There are some other ones we could talk about." There is that. I know people on Spaces have been discussing this the last week, and I'm sure it will sort itself out. But it's just, you know, it's one of those things, really.
Yeah, the reality behind those numbers and where they might have come from, and why those individuals might necessarily have those numbers. As you say, you know, it's not specific to Spaces or to social audio. You know, people have bought followers ever since there were social media platforms, whether it's for the vanity metrics or to, you know, sell sponsorship or whatever it might be. People have got their reasons for inflating their numbers. When it comes down to it, I think that anyone who's a true creator realises that having an engaged audience is far better than having a massive audience. And sometimes that means it's not a very big audience at all. It's, you know, quite niche, but you kind of get to know people and build that community. And I think that's, you know, a lot of genuine creators will be after that authenticity rather than the numbers. That's kind of maybe my naive view on it, but yeah, you're right. It's not completely specific to this at all. This is just the moment where we're realizing it in social audio, maybe because we've not seen it in quite this way before, and it's happening at a time when Twitter appear to be doing this testing for themselves as well. So there's kind of this double track to it in a way, as Andrew put it, you know, the good bots and the bad bots.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there is that kind of extra concern, which is just, again, all social platforms face it. But as Spaces are becoming more of a kind of promoted ground for political debate, certainly by people even who are running for the presidency in the US. If you're relying on quoting numbers for those things, you would quite like those to be reliable, particularly as an election is coming up. So there's that one too, but I'm sure they're aware of that as well.
Yeah, and potentially that's why they're stress testing it then, so they can be sure of the trustworthiness of the stats that they can give. Maybe that's kind of their reasoning. Another idea.
I also think it won't take them long to realise, especially on the, as Morgan says, on the political side, which I think we're going to see a huge influx of spaces coming up, is that what will really be eye-watering for them is when they start to utilise and learn how to use spaces properly. Because if you are running a political campaign and having everybody come in and listen to your views, the natural thing has to be that you say, and by the way, if you'd like to donate to my campaign, I've posted the link in the nest. Now, the amount that they raise during those spaces will be more indicative than how many people supposedly they had in the space at that particular time. And it's these little things that because again, a lot of these people that are running these spaces are newbies. They don't really know how to use the system and the full weight of it. And there's so many amazing stories that every week are happening on Twitter Spaces. I mean, even this week we had somebody started a space called Kevin Durant is not top 5. You know, the legend basketball player. And guess what happened? He dropped into the space. They had 259,000 people in there. And these are the stories we're not hearing. And these are going to happen more and more. Twitter Spaces and this social audio is ripe for every sports player, fan all over the world. And that's just one small category. And there's so many of these stories. Kelly Clarkson coming into a space. Nobody's really talking about that. Hosting her spaces, doing some exclusives of her new songs that she's bringing out. It's happening more and more. What Twitter needs to do is start highlighting these. But as we know, they've cut the teams. They're running on bare bones. It's probably going to be down to people like Suze and Madalyn and myself and everybody else to start really highlighting to brands and businesses how you actually start to utilize Twitter Spaces properly. Because there are a lot of people that are just playing at the moment and don't really use it to its best advantage. But it's happening. And the numbers are proving that they are still coming. And these little nugget stories like Kevin Durant, when would that ever happen? When could any human being ever think that they could start a radio show with their phone, talking about their famous NBA player who they love, who's their hero, and he drops in and has a chat with them?
Yeah, incredible, amazing, and that's the magic of it, isn't it? That's why we've loved it so much, because we can see the potential and all the different ways that it could be used, and we just don't see the platform kind of supporting that and really pushing it forward. It's it's strange. I mean, the other thing is, okay, so we've talked about bots in live spaces, but why are replays going down so sharply? Like, we used to see hundreds of people play the replay, even if we didn't get huge numbers live listening in the space. So all I can imagine is that those tweets, and, you know, we do recommend that you retweet your card out again after you've finished your space to, you know, remind people to listen again and play the replay. Is it just that people aren't doing that, or are people not seeing those tweets? As I say, you know, I'll be lucky if 50 people see a tweet when I put it out at the moment, and I'm, you know, it's kind of demoralising.
I think it's not being seen.
And it may mean that we have to start trying new things, where it may be that you start putting your replay links in other spaces that are relevant to you. Or, as I've always said, I don't want to see a purple card that I've got to click on. I want to see something about the personality in that space. I want that to be the preview, the clip, the insight, drag me back into it, see what I've missed. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but maybe we start seeing more creative ways of how those replays are done. If the algorithm is no longer providing the replays, then we just need to change it up a bit.
That's such a great point. And I've been playing around with FlowGen and Zealous, who have great tools where you could take your space that you've already hosted and go back in and even incorporate AI to go pull clips that you then can put on social media. So I'm testing it, and I'm seeing more and more tools offering services like this. So I imagine this could be a way to help boost replays by getting more of these nice looking pieces of content instead of that ugly purple card.
Yeah, and we used to be able to clip. The clip tool didn't work fantastically. But as we've said before, you don't know how lucky you are until something's not there anymore. But we used to be able to kind of clip stuff and send it out. Yes, it looked dull, and we always wanted them to improve it. But now we don't have that anymore. And you're right, kind of solutions like ClipGen, which is another one which you could use for podcasting, which uses AI to pull out different clips from a podcast and then creates them in lots of different formats so that you can push them out on platforms sort of in a relevant style and a relevant format. I think what Zealous is doing is very much close to that, but doing it for social audio, which is really exciting and interesting. So yeah, I think we'll probably be talking to Gregarious within the next few weeks, I think, about that new feature that he's got going over there.
Thank you to all of our speakers who came on and shared so much great stuff. And we're available in all of your favorite podcast apps. We're out there, All Things Audio. You can also go to allthingsaudiopodcast.com as well.
You certainly can. And you can catch us here on Twitter and use the hashtag AllThingsAudio, and we'll pick that up throughout the week. So that's it for this week. But thank you so much to everyone that's been here in the space with us and those of you listening. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Bye, everybody.